Alrighty. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm going to give a little introduction here to Oliver on kind of his background and what he's going to be talking about today. I have a little bio that he sent me. So, Oliver joined Horizon Air in 2017 as a first officer, became a base chief pilot in December 2018. He came to Horizon Air after serving as a certified flight instructor at the University of North Dakota, Fighting Sioux alumni here. There, he earned his CFI, II, MEI, and taught a variety of students from undergraduate to the Japanese JCAB flight labs. He found and ran Great Plains Air while simultaneously serving as a portfolio manager for the Dakota Venture Group, a venture capital private equity fund. He holds a bachelor's degree in commercial aviation and with a specialization in aviation safety from the University of North Dakota, which is what I'm working on. Actually, I'm working on the same specialization. He was born in Montreal, Quebec. Oliver moved to the United States with his family, and he was 2 years old. He enjoys golf, hockey, Formula One racing, general aviation, and traveling. And he's a volunteer with Safe Kids Worldwide and serves on the board of directors for Bridgeways Everett. So, without further ado, Oliver, you have the floor, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity here to speak today. Really cool to get to speak to the alma mater. Kind of strange. Never thought I'd actually get to speak to everybody like this. So this is cool. I'm going to share my screen real quick here, and if that works. All right, perfect. So kind of like we already talked about, I'll skip over the background for the most part. But my flying career, started 2011 when I was in high school. Started out flying here at Harvey Field in Snohomish, Washington, for those of you who may be familiar with the area. And then, fun fact, I'm engaged to my high school sweetheart and was also a current UND alum. So, what you're probably more interested is my experiences at the University of North Dakota and now flying for Horizon. I started in 2012 at UND, graduated fall of 2016, and to a certain capacity was still associated with the university until I left in October 2017. During my time at the University of North Dakota, I got myself involved in a lot of things, and maybe had sort of an unconventional path through aviation, and really just tried to get involved in as much as I could, and found a lot of different interests, and found a lot of interests in things that I didn't really know I would like at the time, and so I think that was probably one of the best things that happened to me is just having the chance to explore and try all these new different things. I was involved in a few different Greek life organizations. Was part of Alpha Tau Omega, Order of Omega, and Alpha Kappa Psi. Greek life for me was a great networking opportunity. A lot of really great people that I got to meet while I was there, and many of them I'm still in touch with today, and some I have the distinct pleasure of actually working with to this day. As a flight instructor, obviously, that's kind of what sort of the career path takes us down. As we're going through our certificates, ratings, all that stuff. The university, I always thought, did a really good job of getting us prepared for the airlines, and it's kind of hard to realize that until you actually got to the airlines. I think maybe not just myself, but I think some of my other classmates at the time thought, well, maybe this is just something that the airlines say that they want, or say that it looks like, and I was always very surprised every time I took a turn, and how similar my flight training and flight instructing career at UND, how similar that was to the airline world, both in just the way you operate, the thought process behind everything, even down to how the manuals were written. I always thought was kind of interesting. They were very eerily similar. I felt like when I was going through ground school, that I was like, wow, I feel like I'm looking at my old flight instructor manuals and stuff. So that was always, kind of refreshing to see that, a lot of the experience that you're going to get as a student, and if you decide to flight instruct, was really impactful, and really did help set us up. I definitely think oh gosh, what was it, 480, basically the mock airline ground school that a lot of the commercial aviation majors will go through. I thought that was absolutely phenomenal at getting prepared for the airlines. Very similar, and if you can get through that, you'll be able to get through an airline ground school. And I think that's it just gives you a taste of what to expect, and really sort of sets the stage for what level of performance you need to bring, the level of knowledge you need to have. Obviously, every airline is going to be kind of different. Everybody's going to have their own different style of how they like to fly the airplane, and that's kind of the fun part too. Is every airline's got their own distinct style. Kind of like we talked about already in the introduction. I went and got my CFI II and MEI. I don't know if I'm still doing it, but there was an incentive plan at the time to go get your MEI. And I always thought that the MEI was probably one of my favorite ratings that I got while I was at the University of North Dakota. And the flying that I ended up doing as a result of that, I thought was probably some of the most impactful for me personally. I don't know what it is about twins. There's just always something that happens when you're flying a twin. I had a couple alternator failures while I was flying. I had an engine failure, all kinds of weird, goofy stuff, when I was flying the twin. And you spend so much time in your safety classes or just your general flight training, talking about, what do you do in response to this? So what do you do in response to that? And when I actually got out to start teaching multi-engine students, I really felt like I actually had an opportunity to use some of that knowledge. And maybe unfortunately, I had some of those real world experiences, but just the decision-making process that went into a lot of that flight training, I thought was really good. So if you have the opportunity to get your MEI and to flight instruct, I know the state of the industry is kind of in an odd spot. Everybody seems to be kind of pointing in different directions, but if you do have the opportunity to get your MEI, I would definitely recommend it. It was one of the most impactful things that I did. I think as a pilot, I thought that was really helpful. As a supervisor of flight, so it was another one of those things that I got involved with. And the supervisor of flight was at the time it was something to kind of keep me busy during the winter months, as I'm sure all of you are aware. You might sometimes go through long spells of not flying, and it is what it is, and that's everybody in flight training has that same problem. But the supervisor of flight was something that keep me busy, and keep me at the airport and working, and help supplement when I wasn't flying. What I realized as an SOF was that it really shifted my perspective. From I'm operating, I'm working with a student, and we're the two of us or three of us are going up flying, and a lot of times, I didn't realize this, but you find yourself thinking about like my flight, and I need to get this done, I need to be here, I need to do that, and what the SOF desk really did for me was it really introduced the perspective of there's a bigger picture to this operation, right? Like I'm one Seminole, but there may be another 8 out and about doing something. And sometimes it's difficult to sort of get out of your own head and sort of think about the operation as a whole, and think about decision making from the perspective of 15 airplanes, 50 airplanes flying around, instead of just me, myself, and I, and totally understandable, right? That's we're all trying to build experience, trying to get through our flight labs. We've got a lot of classes. Very few of us have very little going on, so it's very I always found it very easy to kind of get into that mindset of just trying to get through everything. But when you had a sort of the perspective, when you sort of introduce the perspective of, okay, there's other things in the operation that are happening around me, and what can I do differently? When I have sort of that perspective, it really helped it really helped with the quality instruction that I was giving to my students. It sort of helped give a sense that, there's other things that need to happen for the whole flight to work out. And where that really becomes, impactful is when you're out there flying the line for, a 121 carrier, you have to rely on a lot more resources than what you do as a flight instructor or as a student, right? If the airplane's airworthy and there's gas in the tank, that's most of the time, that's about all you need. You're ready to go fly. When you have when the size of the operation grows and grows in complexity, there's a lot more that you need to rely on. The ground handlers need to obviously have their function. The flight attendants are doing something. Maybe there's maintenance going on. Dispatch is talking to you about weather, and maybe you're having to do fuel planning, and all of a sudden the margins become tight, a lot smaller, and it sometimes helps to have that sense of perspective of how do all these other pieces of the puzzle fit in to get me from A to B. And I think that's really what the SOF does help do for me, is kind of get my head out of the individual mindset and more of an operational mindset. And for those of you out there who might really enjoy kind of all the gears that turn and what it takes to run an operation or an airline. Even the UND operation, there's a lot of moving pieces to that. It's no small feat, as most of you are aware. So that's a great opportunity if anybody's interested in that. Where my experience at UND sort of took a different direction was my involvement with Great Plains Air and the Dakota Venture Group. And that's a set of experiences that I was really fortunate to have. I still very fondly look back on, and there's a lot of things I wish I had done differently. And you can obviously Monday night quarterback all those types of decisions for the end of time, but really happy that I had them. And how this all kind of got started is actually in Dan Malot's class, of all people. We were sitting in I believe it was fleet planning and aircraft acquisition. And Dan walks in one day and says, "Hey, there's an entrepreneurship professor who's, upset that, he was showing some clients around Grand Forks, and, he was flying on one of the big three airlines, and they lost all of his bags. And he's upset about it, and he wants to, do something about it. He's an entrepreneurship professor." And I thought that was pretty interesting. I'd always, felt like there was an interest and desire in business aviation. And so I went, myself and a couple of the students went to talk with this professor. And what ended up happening is we took basically a joint project between the aviation college and the entrepreneurship college at the time. And we tried to start an airline or some type of supplemental air service in the area. And the idea was, for anybody that's ever heard of Surf Air, it was basically, the idea was Surf Air for North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. And like all great ideas, some of them don't work, and that's okay, because I had a lot of really great experiences throughout the time. And one of the students who was helping me out at the time was associated with the Dakota Venture Group. And that's where I kind of, got my introduction to that type of world. And what I'll say about Great Plains Air is that was one of those things that I felt like I needed to pursue and I needed to chase down, even if it meant it was going to blow up in my face and not work out. And I'm really happy that I went after it when it did. And that ended up leading to a lot of other things. It really sort of sparked a passion inside of me, and I think that's partly what got me to where I am now, is that interest in in aviation and business, where those two meet. And I'm not a business major by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think I've ever actually completed a business class from start to finish. I think I made it about halfway through an accounting class, and that didn't go over super well, but I'm mostly self-taught when it comes to my business knowledge, and this is really where that started. The Dakota Venture Group, I think about it. The more I think about it, the more I'm surprised that type of an organization exists, because it's just such an anomaly, and it's such an interesting and such a really well-founded organization, and the experience that was able to get through that, I think was helped me in a way that I didn't really know would help me at the time. And for those of you who maybe have never heard of the Dakota Venture Group, it's a student-run organization at UND, and I believe they're still operating. I still see the social media posts. Admittedly, I don't keep track with what's going on exactly, but for anybody that's ever seen the show Shark Tank, that's very similar to what the Dakota Venture Group does. It's private equity and venture capital, investing. So, basically taking startup companies and helping them get to, a fully running, operating business. My interest in that was, there's an increasing number of aviation-related companies that were joining the portfolio, and at the time it was pretty much all business and pre-med majors. So a lot of medical device companies, that type of thing, and naturally a lot of business majors. But there wasn't any aviation majors. And so with that growing, primarily, UAS unmanned based companies, I felt like that, would be an interesting place to, sort of expand and grow as a person. And it's also not an environment that I was very used to. I asked a lot of dumb questions. I was the dumb person in the room for a long time. And really what that forced me to do is what I had to force myself to do, because it was good for myself, was to lean into a lot of the tough conversations, particularly the conversations that, I didn't really understand what exactly was being talked about, but that was kind of the point, was that those are the conversations that you really need to lean into. And those are the conversations that I think are going to make yourself and myself, more effective and just better at what you're doing. And, in that type of world, you live in a lot of uncertainty, which in the airline world is, in a similar way, we live in an uncertain world at times. COVID's a really good example of that. When the pandemic first broke out, I think everybody was in the same boat. There's no playbook for this. Nobody really had an idea of what you should do or what you shouldn't do. Nobody knew if we were going to have jobs. I mean, there were some weeks I remember talking to people, and we didn't even know if we were going to be flying airplanes next week. We thought there was a real chance that the government might shut down air traffic, and we would all just go home and sit on our hands. So there was a lot of uncertainty, and what it sort of teaches you is how to live with that uncertainty. And I think that's a helpful skill to learn, is how to cope with that. Because as airline pilots, we're going to go through a lot of different phases through our career. You ask a lot of the 30+ year pilots who, lived through 9/11, the dot-com bubble, 2008, and now COVID. There is a lot of value in sort of being able to stomach and live with the uncertainty that kind of comes with the industry. But, with all things that, are uncertain, and with all the downside, there's obviously an upside to it. There's a reason why we're all doing what we're doing. And I think a lot of that is the love for the industry and the love for flying. I don't think anybody does this because they think they're going to make $1 million. I think it's because you, like many of us, have shiny airplane syndrome. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my experience at UND. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and I'm really happy, and I look back on it quite fondly. My time at Horizon, again, kind of a different path. I didn't really realize I was going to go down this path when I first started. I got hired in 2017. This was shortly after my activities with Great Plains started to wind down, and I'd always wanted to fly for the airlines. So I thought, well, now's about as good a time as ever to make that jump. And So I did. Went and got hired at Horizon. Biggest driver for that is, I've always had a close tie to Alaska Airlines. Growing up in Seattle, Alaska was always the hometown carrier, and felt a lot of support for that. And primarily wanted to live out in Seattle. That's where I'd grown up, and that's where I wanted to go back to. I didn't really have an interest in being based in Minneapolis, Atlanta, New York. That wasn't really the thing for me. At the time, had the choice between the Q400 and the E175. To be honest, that the Q400, I know a lot of people, might look at that as like, why would you go fly a Q400? It's a dying airplane. There's very few of them out and flying, and even the ones that are still flying are quite old. And that's kind of the reason why I went to go fly it. It's a very different generation of airplane. It doesn't really help you out with a whole lot. It's incredibly detail oriented, and I'm happy I did it because I think it made me a much better pilot. And to be honest, that was what they had, what they were primarily hiring for was the earliest class date. It was where I could get finished in training the quickest. And so that's what I took that opportunity, and I'll kind of touch on that on the next slide. I've got some things that I've learned just in my time doing this, and I'll touch on the new hire classes and the captain upgrades, that type of thing. So I got hired October 2017, and December 2018 I got hired on as as the only Seattle-based chief at the time. There's now 2 Seattle-based chiefs. We've sort of reshuffled, and there's 2 of us here now, which has been really nice to have the extra help. Getting into the chief pilot's office was something that, after my time with Great Plains and the Dakota Venture Group, it really sparked that interest in me and made me realize there was a lot I didn't know about business. There's a lot that I needed to learn. But it really proved to me that there was that desire to go out and pursue that. My thought process had been for most of that time was that, a base chief pilot, probably needs, 10, 15, 20 years of seniority, probably has to be a captain. I had sort of this picture, and I think that was mainly because of who was currently in the chief pilot's office at the time. Bill was a very good friend of mine, 32-year captain, flew the CRJ, the Q400, the Dornier, just all around awesome guy, spent 30 plus years with the airline. Rick Smith, same thing, F-28 and Q400 captain. He'd been with Horizon for about 25 years. He medicaled out, so he had a bit of a different reason for going to the chief pilot's office. And then my predecessor, April, Q400 captain, been with Horizon. I think she left to go to Alaska Airlines when she was on her 8th year. So from my perspective, these were people that, stuck in their roles for a while and had a lot of, really interesting experience usually. And so when the opportunity opened up and the application window opened, I put my name in the hat. The application window didn't immediately kick my application out when I sent it in. I didn't get one of those auto-respond emails, so took that as a good sign. And what started off with one interview, I was surprised at that. And I walked into that interview, and my only goal was to get to know my boss and my boss's boss on good terms. I didn't want to have to go into their office for the first time after having done something boneheaded and had to explain why I did something boneheaded. I wanted to put a name to a face. I thought there might be some value in that. And that's all I went in looking for, was that. Interviewed, I thought it went all right. And then got called back for a second interview. And that's when it really hit me that, they might actually be taking me serious. And so went in, sat down, did the second interview with a few different folks. And then to my surprise, at 6 p.m. on a Friday, my boss at the time calls and goes, "Hey, you're going to be the new base chief, and get used to the 6 p.m. phone calls on a Friday." So that was my introduction to the chief pilot's office. But the thing that I found out about all that later is that this perception that I had of what does a base chief pilot look like, and was really quite far off from what I think in practice it actually does look like. There were only 6 people that applied for that job out of a pilot group of 850. All 6 were first officers, myself included. And what that really showed is that your perception of what this thing might look like, don't let that be the thing that kind of holds you back. And there can absolutely be different things, and come to find out afterwards, with a bit more time in the industry, that it wasn't as uncommon as I had thought for a first officer to be a base chief pilot. And so I'm definitely happy and glad that I took that shot and just went for it. It worked out, and I was lucky and fortunate to get that job. And then in 2019, had the chance to transition over to the E-175. At the time, there were 3 base chiefs. All of us were Q400 drivers. And by that point, by 2019, about half of our pilot group had transitioned from the Q400 to the E-175. And me being in Seattle, the biggest E-175, biggest and only E-175 base at the time, I decided to make the transition over. Was really happy with that, and really helped me connect with a totally different segment of the pilots that I get to work with. And then 2020 happened. We all know how that played out, and that was, for the most part, a pretty quiet year. Maybe quiet's not the right word. It was just different. At times, it was very up and down. There were some weeks where there just wasn't enough time in the day to do whatever I was trying to do. And then there were some weeks I found myself sitting on my hands the whole time because we just didn't know what was going on, and we didn't know exactly what to do. So there are a lot of swings, I would say, but we managed. We tried to do the best that we could. We tried to keep, from my perspective anyways, we tried to keep the pilots in mind as best as possible, and do everything that we could to support them. Obviously, when these types of things happen, nothing is structured to support what needs to happen for an airline to survive through a pandemic. And that, that might have upset some people. We had to do some things that were kind of different. And I think at the end of the day, the results speak for themselves. We're in business. I think today we had a 65% load factor. We didn't furlough any pilots. We grew flying. We added flying in the state of Alaska. We picked up after carriers went bankrupt. So there's a lot of pain points through the pandemic, but I think the end results is, I think that makes up for it. And now 2021, things are starting to turn around a little bit. A lot of carriers are starting to hire. Most regional carriers, I think, by this point are starting to hire. There's a lot of TSA, ExpressJet, Compass pilots that are still kind of out there in the market. And I think once a lot of the existing pilot furloughed pilot group makes its way through, I think you'll start to see a lot more hiring come to the flight schools. So if it hasn't already happened, my thought is it's not far around it, especially once the major carriers start to hire. Starting to see some stuff come out of United and Delta, and that's all good signs. Those are good signs in the industry. So hopefully optimistic, and hopefully that things keep turning the way they have been. Collection of, I wanted to just kind of put down a bunch of things that I thought about, and just saw that made a difference in whether it was my own life or the pilots that I supervise's lives. And just things that, if it was my choice, and, I could, sort of point people in one direction or another, these are sort of the directions I would point to everybody. Number one is, apply even if it's a Hail Mary. When me going into this job, that's what it was. It was a Hail Mary, and I stuck with it, and it paid off. And so even if you may not feel like you're, the most qualified or the best person for it, go for it. There's no there's no harm in going for it, even when you think you might not be the most qualified for it. New hire classes and upgrades. So a mentor of mine who is a former assistant chief pilot on the Alaska side and was the vice president, one of the vice presidents over here on the Horizon side. He always tells a really good story about how when he got hired on at Alaska Airlines a number of years ago, he was going back and forth between a specific new hire class, and he had some personal stuff going on, and he was considering, delaying that new hire class and pushing it back to the next month. He had the option, and he decided, I'm just going to take the earlier class, and this was, I think, in the 90s. He took that first new hire class that he was offered, and when 9/11 happened, and pilots were being furloughed, he missed the furloughs by one new hire class. It was that second new hire class after the one he went through that ended up getting furloughed. And so what he's always, and I see it, and what he's always preached is never turn down a new hire class, never turn down a captain upgrade, because it sometimes could be that much of a difference between two classes. You just never know. Living in base. So I know as airline pilots, one of the cool things is that we have the opportunity to commute, and that's kind of a double-edged sword. And from what I've seen, the pilots that lived in base were by far the happier bunch. Not that you can't be happy commuting, but there is definitely something to be said about actually living in base and just being able to go home at the end of a trip, especially if you're on reserve. It kind of comes and goes in seasons. Sometimes you might spend time on reserve, sometimes you may not. But I always found it difficult to watch people, that would commute from Seattle. They would come from Dallas, come to Seattle, and sit on airport reserve, and you could almost see it drain the life out of them. And I don't wish that on anybody. I would rather see you fly for an airline that you're able to live in base for, and I think that's going to do wonders for your quality of living. That's my take on that. If you're a flight instructor, treat your students well. You never know the day that one of your students may end up being your base chief pilot. 3 of my former flight instructors that I worked with, I now supervise, and I'm happy we all have a really good relationship. They treated me very, very well, but this industry, the more time goes by, the more I've come to realize that it's not so uncommon for the student to become the teacher, and for someone that you might have worked with or worked under in one capacity, you may supervise them in another capacity. I see it a lot with the Air Force pilots that come out of Joint Base Lewis McChord out here in Seattle. It's funny, you see the roles reversing. And so it's a slice of humble pie once the roles start to reverse there. But it also speaks volumes about your character as well. Part of what's made UND great over the years is the quality of the instruction. So I would really encourage you to do your best you can with the students that you're working with. Make sure that they get the best education, because when you come to an airline and they come to an airline and their students come to an airline and people around you see, they see you and they'll know you're a UND grad, and they look and they go, that guy knows his stuff. Highly competent, qualified pilot, great to fly with. That pays dividends for the school as a whole. You're doing everybody that has come before you and will come, a huge favor. Kind of like I talked about earlier, perspective of thinking things from an operational perspective and not always an individual perspective. I think that sometimes will help you out a lot, especially when there's things you may not understand. And even if there are things you don't understand, I think there's always going to be someone there that will be willing to help answer those questions for you. Interview tips, a couple things I just wanted to throw out there, just as I know airlines are hiring, and there's probably a number of you who are looking to get on with an airline. And just some of the things that I've seen, I probably do most of the chief pilot interviews for Horizon, and just some of the things I've seen kind of get people into a pickle that I think knowing ahead of time might help you out. Number one, knowing the company values. It always looks really good when you understand the company, what they're trying to do, what the mission is. Not only the values, but just where do you operate? What do you operate? What's your niche? Obviously, if you're Delta or if you're Allegiant, your target audience are two very different people, and understanding kind of what comes with that, I think is really going to be impactful. Logbooks, that's always one that every career fair I go to, I always hear someone talking about logbooks, because you always see one. I always told my students, make the logbook entries in pen, total in pencil. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. Whiteout, it's always an interesting one. I've seen people come through with entire pages with whiteout. As an interviewer, I don't know anything that would make me feel more uncomfortable than to see entire logbook pages in whiteout. And then just make sure your totals add up. If you've only flown a Piper Archer and a Seminole, make sure that the total single engine time and the total multi-engine time add up to the total time. It's not uncommon to see that those times don't quite line up. So little things like that, just kind of a reasonableness check before you hand over your logbooks. Background checks, always disclose all your check ride failures, even if you think it's not necessarily pertinent. It doesn't hurt. The biggest thing that I look for when I'm doing background checks is what we talked about in the interview and what you disclosed on paper. Are those two things the same? If they're not, it's usually where we start running into problems. But if they're the same, life's good. So you can do yourself a huge favor, because even if you over communicate and a background check comes back with less, sometimes like blown tires and stuff like that can sometimes those get kind of weird and sometimes into the gray area. I think that just over disclosing will help. And then with COVID right now, try to gain as much experience as you can. There's some flights, I'm not entirely sure how much flight instructors at UND are teaching right now, but if you have an opportunity to get experience flying boxes, aerial surveillance, right now getting all the experience you can wherever you can, I think is gonna help you out quite a bit. Gouges, every carrier seems to have a different opinion on this. My opinion on gouges is, if there's a gouge out there, I would be shocked if you didn't go look at it. Just like any flight, you use all your available resources to prepare. I would hope that you do the same in preparing for an interview. If there's a gouge out there, do whatever you can to prepare yourself as best as possible. It really helps refine the product that you have to offer, and I definitely think it makes it a more enjoyable experience for the candidate as well. And then big thing that I've always sort of made a point of doing is the volunteer work. There's a lot of times where you kind of get stuck in your own head, and I think having the perspective sometimes of being involved and giving back to the community and helping out, I think really helps build a well-rounded character. During my time at University of North Dakota, I was involved with Safe Kids. That was a bit every year they would host a big event, essentially trying to help prevent accidental death and injury to young children. And it happens surprisingly more often than I think what most people would think. And Bridgeways is a local nonprofit here that helps with mental illness and those who have been incarcerated by in part due to their mental illness. It's been a great opportunity to give back to the local community. For those of you not familiar with wherever it is, it's basically just one of the neighboring towns from Snohomish. And so that's definitely that hits close to home, and that's part of my local community out here, and so I feel a strong connection to help out in whatever way I can. And mental health is something that's ran in my family, so it's touched me personally, and so that's why I've been involved where I have been, and I would encourage anyone else who's curious to also get involved out in the community. little amount of effort, I think sometimes can go a really long way. And so I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work, but I'm going to try it anyways. Got a video here of this is a Part 91 repo flight in a Q400, and this is a video of a Cat 3 ILS down to 50 feet, down to 600 RBR, and this is me sitting here in the right seat. And when you hear minimums, I'm not sure how well you can hear the volume, but when you hear minimums, that's 50 feet. And it's pretty surprising how low that is. And this is all hand flown. And then, of course, you're on the ground and the Q400 starts to rattle and the camera moves around. But that's my treat for everybody for listening to me ramble for about 45 minutes. There we go. All right, so hopefully I'm doing good on time, and turn it back over to everybody to ask some questions.
Awesome. My name is Brent Gibson. I'm the SAMA conference director. I'll help facilitate the questions today that everyone has. First question we got, what do you mean by the gouge? Could you explain that concept a little further?
Sure. So I think probably the most common place I see a gouge. So gouge is basically, people come in, who have gone through the interview process, it's not uncommon for people to post, their experiences online, kind of help give people, a sense of perspective of what to expect when you go into an interview. And I think Airline Pilot Central is probably the biggest one that I've seen, but I've seen my own interview questions get posted on there. And obviously we always try to mix up the interviews so they're not the same, but if you know that there's going to be, a technical piece, and that they're going to emphasize, certain things. If you're going to get a question about company values, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like it may be a good thing to show up prepared and know that, because I'm probably going to ask you about company values if you're interviewing with me. So those types of things, if you can know that ahead of time and be prepared, I would much rather see you be prepared so that we can have a good conversation about, about culture and the airline than to sit there and watch you squirm and go, oh gosh, that might have been a really good thing to know. That's my take on it. I think it makes the interview process go a lot better. And so that's my take on gouge.
Your turn. Alrighty. Next one we have is, what kind of leg do you prefer in the Q400? Short hops or long distance flights down the coast? And what's kind of your favorite part about flying the Q400?
It's a good question. I think when you got a mix of both of them, it was fun. The short hops are fun because, especially early on, because it's a brand new airplane, so the repetition is really nice to have. I mean, if you're 24 and you can do 4 legs a day, it's fun. As time goes by, you may not be so interested in 4 legs a day, but it's certainly helpful for getting used to the airplane. So I liked a lot of the short hops for a while there, and then you like to expand out a little bit more and see different things. But the flying has sort of shuffled back and forth between the Q400 and the U-175. The Q400 doesn't really go down to California anymore. We keep it close to Seattle and Portland for the most part. But when I first got hired on, we had a 4-day, was it 4-day or 3? I think it was 4-day trip that would go from Seattle down to Santa Rosa, LA, and then you bounce back and forth between like LA, San Francisco, San Jose. You go out to Mammoth Lakes. If anybody knows anything about Mammoth Lakes, that place is the wild, wild west. It's a very interesting place to go fly a Q400, but you sort of got a taste of everything, right? Because you got to fly in and out of LA, get to fly with all the jet traffic, and then you got to go out to Mammoth Lakes, it's a ski resort. And, the airport it sits, I think, 3 miles away from I want to say it was like 11 or 12,000 foot mountain peak. So you get some very interesting, experience in a 45-minute turn. So California flying, the West Coast flying, I think is a lot of fun. Pretty much everywhere you go, it's interesting.
All right, awesome. Let's see here. Let's move on to our next few questions here. So Riley Brainerd asked, what would you think that someday down the road we might see a comeback of the Horizon Ascend program?
So we've been talking about the pilot development programs. I think that's what you're referencing. We are looking at opening that back up. I know by popular demand, we've been getting a lot of questions about that program. We do want to open it back up. And I think the thought right now is early 2022 is when that's probably going to be, a reality, but we certainly want to get it open as soon as we can. And to sort of touch on that real quick, the benefit of that program, this pandemic really showed where that program was super valuable, both for Horizon and for the students. In all of our interview classes, we would take in about 6 pilots. 4 of those ended up typically being, prior 121 airline pilots. The other 2 were pilot development students. So I think, that ability to draw from that pool and bring in our pilot development students was super helpful. And I think the students really appreciated that because they were getting to come in and interview class or come into new hire classes with pilots with 5,000 plus hours. So I think that was a really cool opportunity. And I'm really happy we were able to do that.
Cool. Awesome. Let's see our next question here. So, anonymous attendee asked, as someone from Seattle who also wants to go back to fly, how challenging is it to get based out there compared to Minneapolis or another large airport similar to that?
I mean, if you get if you get hired into the E-175, Seattle's the only base, so that's an easy one for us. On the Q400, I try to tell people if you want to go fly the Q400, just don't do it in Seattle. The way the flying is structured in Seattle, the trips get it's just a product of the way our flights work. A lot of our flights start at an outstation. They come in the morning, then they go back out. And that primarily happens in Seattle. So the way the flying works, it's actually much more enjoyable to be based in, Portland, Medford, Spokane, Boise. A lot of those bases have much better flying. We do have a Q400 base in Seattle, and you can go there, and we do have some people that do, but the quality of the flying and the amount of flying is much better, mainly because the E-170, and partly because the E-175 is based in Seattle, and that's half the pilot group. So if you wanted to come fly for us and be based in Seattle, I would tell you go for the E-175.
All right, cool. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Let's see. Where do you see yourself in 20 years? I was asked by an anonymous person.
That's a good question. I'm trying to figure out what to do in these next couple of years. It's kind of a toss-up. I mean, I had a plan sort of in mind prior to COVID. And COVID pretty much uprooted all of that, as did a lot of people's. 20 years, I'd be really happy to still be doing, still being in a leadership role and, continuing to work, for either Horizon. If given the opportunity, I would probably go help out on the Alaska side as well. It's a very similar culture as on the Horizon side. And so I would be happy to do that, but definitely, sticking within the Alaska Air Group family, that's in 20 years, that's where I hope I'm still able to be.
All right. Let's see. Another question that came in says, can you open STS as a domicile?
I wish. We used to have a triple Santa Rosa overnight, and that was probably the most highly sought after trip in the whole system. But I could definitely see why you would want a Santa Rosa base. But we've been asked that question, versions of that question a lot, like why don't we have a California base? And never say never. but we just got to see how the flying is going. We just started flying in the state of Alaska, so we're kind of actually moving the opposite direction from California right now. So we've been flying out of Anchorage. We've been doing King Salmon, Dillingham, Fairbanks, and in August we're going to start doing Kodiak. So if anything, that's kind of the direction that we're moving towards right now is Anchorage.
Well, hopefully you open up some California bases. That's where I'm originally from. So I'm from the LA area.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I think you touched on this a little bit, but do you prefer the Q400 or the Embraer 175?
You know, the Q400, in my opinion, was the more fun airplane to fly. I don't know. There's something about flying a turbo. That airplane is just such an anomaly. There's no other airplane I've seen that, you know, will take off and land, you know, fully loaded off a 5,000 foot runway. Like Wenatchee is a good example. You know, it's tucked away in the Cascade Mountains. You'll take off fully loaded, and then you'll turn around and you'll fly a jet arrival profile into Seattle. It's super flexible. It does basically everything you ask of it. And the sort of, and this mainly because a lot of our Q400 pilots ended up going to fly the E175 and start that program. We're really big on the hand flying aspect of being a pilot. And so the Q400, you know, it was very common to, you know, Missoula is a really good place to do it, but you know, the tower will cut you loose at 10,000 feet in Missoula. And it's just, if you've ever been to Missoula, it's a big bowl. And it's perfect to go learn how to fly a traffic pattern in a Q400. We do that stuff all the time. And I think that culture that we have in the Q400, that hand flying, you know, very pilot friendly culture is what made that airplane a lot of fun. And then, you know, the E175 the E175 is meant to be a different product. The E175 was meant to mimic the mainline product. You know, we do a lot of market testing with that airplane. We'll go into different markets for a short period of time, you know, see, does it work? A good example is we started doing Seattle to Minneapolis. And, you know, we started doing that for about 3-4 months. And it wasn't much more than a year later. And we had 3 737s, you know, on the mainline side doing Seattle, Minneapolis. So it gets to see a lot of different stuff. You do a lot of the longer stage flights, but you also got to, you know, probably the most consistent, you know, long stage flight that we've done in the E175 is Seattle to Dallas Love. And that's 4 hours. You know, do you want to sit there for 4 hours? I mean, some people love it because it's good block, but you know, you also got to like the person you're flying with for, you know, that 4 hours. And if you don't get along with them super well, then, well, it could be awkward, but most people do. I mean, that's not usually a problem, but some people just like to be busy. Some people like the short legs. I kind of like being busy personally. And some people really just enjoy the long legs and, you know, just sort of, yeah, it's just a very different schedule, different markets, different roles. So it just really depends on what you like.
That's awesome to hear. That's actually really cool that you guys have that culture of hand flying, because I don't think you really hear that a lot in the airlines, especially because I know like Delta has some policies on when the autopilot has to be engaged, and I'm sure you do too. But that's really cool to hear that you guys have you guys are allowed to hand fly. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes out of some of the technology we have in the Q400. I mean, the heads-up display, you know, that gets us down to Cat 3 minimums. Those are hand flown down to 50 feet. I mean, that gets you down lower than an auto land will. So there's a lot of emphasis. We just hand fly a lot of the time because that's just the way the technology sort of developed, and it's a really cool experience. That picture at the end there, I can bring it up if anybody really wants to see it, but that's a screenshot right out of one of our heads-up displays in the simulator, and you just don't see that in most regional airplanes. I mean, let alone a Q400. So that's where we've come from. That's you know what laid the foundation for the E175 flying. So I'm glad to see that the E175 is sort of following that footsteps and getting more towards a place of being comfortable hand flying, because you're right, it's not that common to have that sort of emphasis.
Yeah, that's really incredible. But all right, so what is your favorite part of your day to work in your life as a chief pilot?
Ooh, that's a good question. Interview days are always fun. I certainly enjoy the interview days. It's always kind of fun because not so much anymore, but when I first got into the role, I used to see some, former UND students. So that was always kind of interesting to see everybody sort of come full circle. And I was always excited when I got to interview another UND pilot. Let's see, what else is fun? The recruiting events, I always like to do those. We go to OBAP and WIA and NGPA, and those are always fun just to get to see everybody out in the industry. On a day-to-day perspective, though, I think the part that I enjoy the most is just some of the daily interactions that I have with some of my pilots. There's a lot of weird things that happen in everybody's life, and kind of surprised how much weird stuff happens in everyone's life. And you're really kind of the focal point for when things, don't quite go well for pilots. They break a leg, they have something happen in the family, people get sick. You're kind of that focal point for, hey, like my world's falling apart. Like, can you help me get things sort of squared away here? And you really get to be that support system for your pilots. And I've always really liked being sort of that support system and being able to help them through a lot of those issues. And people are always super supportive when you're able to be there and support people. And I think that's by doing that and by helping pilots in sort of that capacity, that's really what's made, Horizon a really fun place to be. Like, we'll never hassle you over, having to call out because, parent, spouse, family member passed away and you're trying to go deal with stuff. We're always going to support our pilots whatever way we can. And so being able to help continue that culture for me has been really, really gratifying.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear. Okay. So I think the next question was, what is your favorite part about working at Horizon? But I think you just answered that. So we'll go to the next one. Let's see. You rise from line pilot to chief pilot pretty quick. Was there anything you did to facilitate that?
It's a good question. I mean, part of it is doing the things that I guess you're kind of expected to do, just doing them well. I mean, obviously everyone wants you to get through ground school. And I think getting through, your ground school, getting through the training, that's a big piece of it, obviously being able to, do that and do it well. And I think part of it is just the way, the way you carry yourself and sort of the mentality you bring to what you do, because that really does change how a lot of situations play out. Kind of like I talked about earlier with the, having an operational perspective versus an individual perspective. It's easy to sometimes get kind of trapped into like, why me? And like, this is really like bugging me. And this is like, I'm really angry. And I think sometimes you just have to take a step back and look at everything else that's happening. And it's like, okay, am I upset that my flight's 30 minutes late and I might not make my commute? Yeah, sure. But there's also 3 ramp agents running around who are soaking wet outside, freezing. There's maintenance that's probably doing something similar. There's people in the SOC that are, they're running around, they're having a hard time too. And so I think having just that perspective and being able to sort of bring that to the operation, I think that probably was something that helped. But to be honest, I think a lot of what helped get me to where I was not so much of what I did at Horizon, but more what I did at UND and just trying to get involved in as much as I could, because I didn't get tons of experience at Horizon. I mean, that was pretty obvious after a year and a half. That I think in my mind, and this is just a guess, my mind is that it came from the things that I got involved with at UND. I think that's what really set it apart.
All right. Going to the next question. So Jared asked, what is the flying lifestyle? Kind of like, I guess, home life or lifestyle. I think that's what he's trying to get at. But what's it like being a Q400 pilot based out of Portland, the lifestyle of it anyways?
I mean, that's actually probably one of the better places to go if you wanted to fly the Q is Portland, just because there's a lot of flying there. So the nice thing is we use PBS. It's a preferential bidding system. And for those who are familiar, maybe not, but PBS, all it is just a fancy computer program that allows you to take trips, individual trips. You can string them together. You can basically pick and build your trips and your schedule. Obviously, you've got to have the seniority for it, but that contrasting that from sort of the legacy, schedule setup where you just had like an entire month's schedule was figured out and you just had to pick from those entire month's schedules. So, as Portland Q400 pilot, you can really pick and build like what type of trips you want. I actually I commuted for a couple of months down to Portland just because my seniority could get me a better line down there and I wanted to get some extra flying because the holidays were coming up. And when I was flying down in Portland, what I would do is I would bid 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. And I was able to build my schedule that way so that, the 2 weeks, it was a hard 2 weeks, but, it was also pretty fun having 2 weeks off. I mean, you get to do whatever you want with those 2 weeks. And so that was great for like a commuter type of schedule. But if you want, day trips or you want to be home more, like you can bid for those types of things. It's just a matter of seniority and, spending a little bit of time with PBS and understanding the logic behind how it awards. But really, the nice thing is you can have whatever type of life you really want to have. If you want to fly a bunch, you want to fly little, you want to fly here, there, it's your choice. That's the nice part about it.
Awesome. Okay, next question we have is, for someone about to graduate this spring, what would you recommend as the best way to go about searching and applying for FO positions now that the easy access to the regionals via the pathway programs are, for the most part, gone?
Yeah. So I think what I would do is I would really, look at like where are you trying to go? What's sort of your end goal, and what's really going to help you get there. Say you want to go to, Alaska, right? Okay. What airlines are partnered with Alaska? Okay. You got Horizon, you got SkyWest. Okay. So you've got some options there. Say you want to go, United, or you want to fly boxes. If you want to fly cargo, okay. Maybe spending some time flying for, Empire or Ameriflight, have some experience flying cargo. I'm talking to a lot of people that have gone, the FedEx and UPS way. They all had cargo experience. So what experience are you going to need to get there? And like I said earlier, I would find a way to live in base. When you don't have to commute, it opens up more possibilities just in terms of picking up flying, being flexible. Also, if you can live in the city where that airline is headquartered, the hub cities tend to be the places where there's a lot of opportunity in training and leadership, safety, usually the union stuff too. That's where a lot of the opportunities are centralized, is in a lot of times where the cities are headquartered. And that's where I would shoot for. So for Horizon, we recently moved the headquarters from Portland up to Seattle. So just to be in line with Alaska, but so Seattle's tends to be where all the opportunities are. It's where a lot of the training happens, basically all the leadership roles, even a lot of the union roles, they're up here in Seattle. And so if you can be here already, I think it gives you the opportunity to get involved in more. So those are some of the things I would be looking for, but it's really tough because that's a really personal question, and it's hard to give you an exact answer without sort of knowing what the end goal is in mind. But those are some of the things that would go on through my head if I was looking at, one regional versus the other. I would find the one or two that you really want and stick with it. Because it shows when you take a shotgun approach and you try to get, go for 6 regionals. Find the one, maybe 2 that you want to go for, and just commit to going that way, because we're all going to be hiring. I mean, there's just no way around it. Once the majors start hiring and they start pulling all the captains, it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that's what I would do.
Awesome. Okay. Riley Brainerd just wants to mention that you guys need to have a Fargo to Seattle route.
So that, yeah, I've asked similar questions to that too, and supposedly there was plans for one at one point, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but I certainly would like to see one as well. It would be very nice.
It would really add to the portfolio of destinations that you can go to out of Fargo, because I think American actually, they've been doing Phoenix flights there, which has been awesome. It's been really easy for me to get home that way.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Next one is, would you say that Horizon has a diverse pilot group? And that being women, race, men, that type of ratio?
That's a good question. I mean, as an industry as a whole, no, it's very white, and it's a very male. Being a pilot is a very white and very male. Traditionally, that's what it's been. Alaska and Horizon have been making a lot of efforts lately, specifically to diversify our pilot groups. We've been spending a lot of time with, we have a series of business resource groups that essentially really promote, people of color, different sexual identities, really getting out and really trying to diversify, not just the pilot groups either, but the company as a whole. So we've certainly been making an effort to do that and be more inclusive. I know there's currently a program going on to rewrite a bunch of the manuals to essentially change a lot of the pronouns and how, a lot of times in our manuals, just historically, when they reference a pilot, it's always he and him. And so there's an effort to sort of change how that's being worded. So it's definitely something that's on everybody's mind. And there's a few different aspects of that. And part of that is outreach, right? Because if people with diverse backgrounds don't know that there's opportunities, then they're not going to put themselves in that position to come to work for an airline, right? So part of it is also trying to be present in those communities and let them know that, hey, we support you. We have these programs. Here's how you can do it. Here's how you can get to the point to come fly with us. So we are definitely trying to be a more diverse carrier. Absolutely.
Great. That's awesome to hear. Okay, so another question. We got two more, and then we'll call it a day. It says, I am working on the new safety specialization with my commercial aviation degree. Does Horizon offer or have opportunities for people to get involved in the safety department from the get-go, or how does that work?
So we do have safety programs. I wouldn't say, right off the bat, they're available. I mean, part of the tough thing, right, is because nobody's moving anywhere. Everyone's kind of, sitting, staying put. But pre-COVID, there was obviously more movement there, and there are definitely opportunities to get involved in the safety department. FOC was a big one. There's both from the company side and from the union side. There's an opportunity there. And so, yeah, absolutely. The safety specialization, I think that goes, that's helpful in a lot of places. It's helpful just as number one, when you're out there operating it, it's sort of formalized, safety training above and beyond what you already get. But there's a lot of places where that background is really going to be, really be helpful. So safety, yep, absolutely. There's going to be opportunities, but there's other places as well.
Alrighty. Last question. Are there summer aviation management internships available through Horizon, or any sort of internships at all at Horizon? At Horizon,
we do. We do have summer interns. I believe they're specifically for juniors in college. That window opens up typically in the fall of each. So, for example, I think we're going to do them for 2022. We have them for 2021. So for 2022, the fall 2021, I believe, is when the application window will open up for that. And then you have the ability to apply, interview for the summer of 2022. And those are for both Horizon and Alaska. Most of the divisions have some type of internship. So there's an opportunity to get involved with Horizon and Alaska flight ops. And that's really cool because you get to see the whole division. You know, there's a lot of different pieces to that puzzle. So it's good. But on that note, for the internship, tomorrow, myself and I believe Daisha Hubbards are going to be presenting for Horizon. Daisha is a lot more familiar with how the internships work than I am. My involvement is usually pretty limited with that. So if you're interested in finding out more, I would definitely tune into the Horizon presentation tomorrow.
Awesome. Yeah, like you said, Oliver is going to be there tomorrow. So if anyone wants it, Andre actually just dropped the link in the chat there. So if anyone wants to sign up and for a one-on-one session or a group session with Mr. Oliver, we can definitely do that tomorrow, and you guys can have a one-on-one and talk about opportunities at Horizon. I just wanted to thank you for coming in. I know it's been a little weird year, obviously, and we're doing this online for the first time since like the 70s when this started. So we really appreciate you coming out, man, and at least tuning in with us on Zoom here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate the opportunity. You know, hopefully we get to do this again in person. It's been a while since I've been back. I actually was thinking about getting red pepper, and I was like, wow, that's been a while. But I miss all that stuff. It was a great time at UND, and I'm super grateful just to be able to speak to everybody and give back to the school that gave me so much. You as well.
That's awesome. But yeah, appreciate it. Also, I just wanted to thank Gary Ulrich and Zach Morgan for letting their class come in today. And then, yeah, that's all we have for you guys. Tune in at 12:30 for our next speaker. Thanks again, Oliver.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.